Now we will hear from Rini Balsaria. She is an urban and planner. She's worked with community health programs with NGOs on a number of different reproductive health issues, adolescent and sexual health. She's worked on HIV/AIDS programs. And she has a background in research and data analysis. She also did an assessment of the post-earthquake families in Gujarat. And she has worked on a host of development issues. She is going to be sharing with us some of the research that she's been involved when looking at perpetrators and the male perspective on domestic violence.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Maitri for inviting me and for making this whole process very inclusive. Vinny called me 2-3 times and I felt very, very included in the process. It wasn't just somebody coming and, sharing my work. I'm going to be talking about 2 studies that I've done. One is about the survivor side of the story, but I can see that a lot of that has already been discussed, and I will not ponder over that too much. What I will do is stress on the men's side of the story. That's the perpetrators. Well, I felt not too many of us knew about that, but the morning sessions were quite good. I think a lot of it we already know now. Let's see. I'd like to dedicate this presentation to all the men who finally found the courage to change their ways, which I think is the light at the end of the tunnel. Not all men beat, and not all of them remain perpetrators. And this being an NGO which has found its seeds in the forces, I think I've named it aptly. For me, all uniformed men were real men, and I call them real men don't beat their wives. So, okay, we've already discussed a lot of the definitions of gender abuse, so I'll just skip that. See, all the research that we've seen actually tells us about unwritten sanctions of men using power and control. Women internalize that since childhood. By internalizing and accepting it, what we're doing is we're giving men the right to violence. And we prevent other women from resisting violence because there's nobody to listen to them. This is weakening female solidarity. Are we drowning their voices? I looked at population-based surveys. We couldn't get too much because there's a lot of issue of blame, fame, and fear. The women are very scared to talk about what they went through at home because they'll get beaten up a little more if they share it with somebody. What was, I think, a better thing for us to do was to do community-based research on domestic violence. This gave a lot of the research, as I went through, talked about the nature, extent, frequency, severity, basic data about these kind of things. Community-based research had to have safety and ethical issues into account because they were sharing something that they wouldn't like, to go further or to be identified with. Yeah, most of the community-based research that I saw from the West blamed patriarchy. That's where all research ended, because, man is God, the husband is God, that's it. I wanted to take it a little further. We saw a lot of biased sampling in the sense research of, let's see, just victims who reached hospitals. So we didn't really have a control group. A case control was absent. So violence is actually giving us huge burdens, health burdens, because victims are more prone to STDs, HIVs, and other illnesses, higher morbidities, as we will see. Okay. We finally found a good frame of analysis. Can we expand this? Okay. Yeah, I'll first describe the cycle of violence. In the cycle of violence, which is of course very typical, we've spoken a lot about it in the morning, but to see it graphically maybe helps. We felt that perpetrators were first, building tension by talking rudely, smashing property, destroying pets, and then it would escalate into violence. And when things started getting out of hand, he would try seduction, which is gifting, minimizing, and denying completely sometimes his role in the whole process. But it would de-escalate and escalate again. So there is a systematic pattern to violence that we felt, and a lot of the case studies that we did with women and men, a lot of women said, that is exactly what he did to me. So I'm sure this is what happens. Now, the power in the control wheel, as you can see, has power in the center. Men want to feel powerful. This is coupled with, supported by physical and sexual violence. Why we're looking at these two only, not psychological and mental, is because the other two are included in physical and sexual, and it's more visible. We could see it. It was easier to research. Now, the spokes of the wheel is the one that's very interesting in this study. It's when the perpetrator is using intimidation, he uses emotional abuse, using isolation, using children. I will not let you meet your children. He denies and blames his wife for a lot of things, denies that he has done anything, using male privileges, basically. Okay. Now, there was a common kind of methodology that we did in both the perpetrators and the survivors' research. This was part of a community health program where we had a band of community health workers. Now, this helped because these women used to live in the slums. It's a study that we did in the slums which are located on the banks of the Sabarmati. And these slums do not exist on any development map. So they're really marginalized. They have no infrastructure, there are no water points, there are no public taps and private toilets. Maybe the poorest of the poor we are talking about here. But it was easier because we had these health workers who were constantly with us. The other thing is we did not look at research as an end product. It was part of a process because we were working there. These organizations have been working with the same slum for the past 30 years. So, and we took our research findings back to them in forms of films and plays to sensitize them. And we realized that it was actually therapeutic for the people who were involved, because the survivors finally found that they could, off their chest kind of a thing, we could talk to somebody, and the perpetrators got time to pause and think about what they were doing, and ultimately, like my research will show, they said, yeah, we don't want a world of violence. I don't know why we behaved like that. So maybe somewhere there is some hope. Okay. Largely, as I said, the population that we're talking about is daily wagers and self-employed people. Almost 90% households were from this group, and very, very early marriage of men and women. We saw that the earlier they got married, violence was a lot higher in the young age group. As their children got older, and they were obviously also getting older, violence decreased. Okay. I'll directly come to the health consequences. The ones that are listed are the ones that we felt need to were the options that we gave them. So we got a high number of non-victims and victims both having, let's say, body ache because of the kind of lifestyle they had and the occupations. You know, they were cart pushers, and you know, they would physically be doing work. The most striking thing about the whole study was much, much higher levels of unwanted pregnancies, vaginal infections, and menstrual disorders. While we just had 30% non-victims who had vaginal menstrual disorders, 62% survivors had menstrual disorders. We also had very, very high levels of moderate injuries. Moderate injuries are bruises, scars, blood clots, blue body, swelling. Mental consequences. We spoke about anxiety and depression. These were also 3-4 times higher among the survivors. I'll just skip that. Okay, we come to the perpetrator's side of the story. Yeah, these were men between 19 and 50, once ever married men. Most of them had about 2 to 4 children. Very, very poor, as you can see. Okay, now 35 respondents out of 126 seemed dissatisfied with their wives because of nagging, complaining, poor cooking, not looking after children, and general things. 24 of them felt that they didn't like their wives' attitudes because they would often deny sex, and because she was suspicious in nature. Okay, 40% admitted to having thought of punishing their wives if she got out of line. Basically, the questionnaire started by some broad issues about, let's say, gender inequality and equity questions. And slowly, with bridging questions, we were actually getting closer to the psyche of the perpetrator. So some of the results are from the initial 22% men admitted to having punished their wives, that's beating them, in the last 1 year. What we are calling perpetrators are only the ones who've beaten their wives in the past 1 month, for easy recall. Okay, the general reasons were economic, due to suspicion, addictions. A lot of them were addicted to drinking, also tobacco. Like they said, this is probably a trigger, but anyway, that was the one that got the most number of, the highest percentage. Okay, then we looked at double standards. We actually did a cross-tabulation of some of the issues. So we realized 45% women were wage earners, yet only 10% helped these women at home. So this threw their sense of equality totally out of gear, you know. The men wanted to take the bigger decisions. They did not want to be beaten in I mean, if they had the right to beat their wives, we asked, is it okay if the wife turns around and beats you? And they said, oh no, that's not fine at all. They did not like police to get dragged in because they said it's a common feature. Anyways, they don't do too much. And a lot of them did know it was a legal offense, but still. Okay, 41% of the respondents felt that occasional beating chalta hai. Jab pyar hai to marenge bhi, that kind of a thing. And the culture of violence in our study has emerged as a myth. It had nothing to do with, I mean, maybe not nothing, but not as much as we make it out to be. Because you've seen your parents fight or your dad beat your brother, I mean, that's also a sense of violence and aggression. It didn't mean that the next generation would be beating their spouses. Because we realized, you know, the young boys would always say, oh, we don't want to be like that. I don't want to be a perpetrator. So what we discussed in the morning, to catch them young and sensitize them, the boys, that I think is really important. That is the crux of the matter. Because the response systems are not in place. They look at punch, local committees. They feel there's a lot of help available. That's the men feel that there's a lot of help available. There are relatives, there is the punch, there are neighbors. But actually all that doesn't prevent domestic violence at all. 80% respondents felt that it was a private matter. Because it's a daily affair and it's behind doors. I mean, it has nothing to do with you. So I think I would conclude by saying that yes, schooling, to sensitize them from at the level of the school. Also identifying victims, not just self-reporting, but a standardized interviewing process at public health centers may be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rini. I think that Rini's research really points out some interesting commonalities that we also see in the global research related to perpetration and victimization of violence. Her findings related to alcohol, for example, again, are similar to studies that have been done in other countries looking at alcohol as a trigger for violence. And as I mentioned in the overview, there's also mixed evidence about the effect on men of witnessing violence as a child. And here again, Rini's research, what they found was that, in fact, witnessing violence as a child did not seem to be associated with perpetration of violence. And also I'd just like to say that her findings related to the health consequences of violence, I think, are also very important and contribute to our understanding of the long-term effects, the reproductive health effects of violence, and anxiety and depression